Welcome to the newest episode of Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. I'm your host, Jason Fraley, picking the brains of the top filmmakers, musicians, and artists of our time. Stage and screen veteran Patrick Page is playing King Lear at Shakespeare Theater Company in Washington, D.C., now through April 16th. He joined me to discuss Shakespeare, his Tony-nominated turn in Broadway's Hadestown, and his upcoming TV performances in HBO's The Gilded Age and Apple's Schmigadoon. Hey, Patrick Page. Hey, thank you so much for joining us on WTOP in D.C.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
We actually spoke a couple years ago when you did the Bard's Best Villains. What was it called? All the Devils Are Here, how Shakespeare invented the villain. Before we could dive into King Lear, just follow up on that really quick. How much fun was that playing all of those famous Shakespeare baddies all in one show?
Just extraordinary. And we'll be bringing it back. So people who missed it when we filmed it will be able to see it. I'm looking forward to that. It's been that show was a real delight for me because I got so many comments from people who said that they had had some bad experiences with Shakespeare in the past, or they had never understood, or they thought that Shakespeare wasn't for them, and the show had changed their minds, had made them understand and love Shakespeare, and that's really my goal.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, if you can, what do you say? If you win some converts in addition to the hardcore Shakespeare fans, that's when you're really doing your job there. All right. Well, we wanted to bring that up because obviously that dovetails perfectly into what we're about to talk about. Right now, you are starring in King Lear, the iconic show King Lear. It is at Shakespeare Theater Company downtown now through April 16th in the Klein Theater. You're a Broadway legend. You can pick and choose whatever shows you want. So, but when they call you and say, do you want to play King Lear? Why is that just like such an easy call? Up, looks like I'm going down to DC.
Well, for a few reasons. One, Lear has been a real central play in my life. I think King Lear was the first play when I was involved in a production in college. I think it was when I first really understood the greatness of Shakespeare in a visceral way, reading the play and seeing the questions of the play, how we relate to one another, how should we organize ourselves, what kind of government should we have, who should be in charge, and finally, who are we really? Like Lear asks the question, who is it that can tell me who I am? When you strip away the roles, when you strip away the role of king, when you strip away the role of father, if you strip away the role of radio host or husband or brother or sister, and you get right down to it, what's there? What's there? Who are we? What's our nature? And I just remember thinking, this is the most extraordinary play imaginable, and I could spend my life exploring it. So I knew it would come back into my life at some point. And the Shakespeare Theater Company is, in my view, the top presenter of classical theater in the United States. They have the right mission to really explore these plays and really make them vivid and alive for a 21st century audience. And then it was one of the world's top classical directors asking me to do it. And for people who don't know, Simon Godwin, who is the artistic director of the Shakespeare Theater Company, is one of the world's foremost classical directors. He is an associate director of the National Theatre of Great Britain, where he recently directed Much Ado About Nothing, Romeo and Juliet, which you may have seen on PBS, in an incredible production, Antony and Cleopatra with Ralph Fiennes, which I saw when I was in London a couple of years ago. He's a regular at the Royal Shakespeare Company, where his production of Hamlet was a runaway hit and toured to the United States and around the world, and his production of Timon of Athens with Catherine Hunter. So this is really an opportunity that I couldn't pass up to work with Simon this particular director on this particular play. And then in Washington, D.C., this is a play about power structures, about government, about how we organize ourselves and what's the best way to do that. The arguments that we're always having every day in the newspapers, on Twitter, on social media. How much should people have? How much should the government do? How little should the government do? These are the questions that Shakespeare is raising in King Lear. So to do them in an audience, for an audience, which I know will be filled with Congress people and senators and Supreme Court judges and lobbyists and so on. It was just an opportunity that I couldn't pass up.
Oh, absolutely. You just gave me, you don't even know how much gold you just gave me about the themes and the proximity, how it ties into DC, and then also some great stuff on Simon Godwin. Like there's like three great answers in there. But actually, before we get too far in, you and I know what King Lear is about, but just in case maybe there's some maybe not Shakespeare novices, maybe they haven't read it in a while, maybe they're in their car listening to this right now. Remind them the basic premise of who King Lear is, the basic setup of the play.
Well, first of all, if you picture Stonehenge or things like that, you won't be picturing our production. This is a production that's set very much in our modern moment. If you watch Succession on HBO, imagine it looking like that. If you're thinking of a lumbering, slow, 4 hour boring production of Shakespeare, put that out of your mind. This is a propulsive filmic thriller that's under 2.5 hours that goes by like that. People think it's over before it's even begun. The basic plot of the play is almost out of a fairy tale, which is that there's a king and he decides that he needs to retire, and he's going to hand the running of the state over to his three children. He's got three daughters. He doesn't have a son, so he's going to split it up between his three daughters and their husbands. And he decides he's sort of rigged to the setup because he's got a favorite daughter, and he thinks that he'd like her to have the most powerful, the richest section of the country. So he set up a kind of a con game, and the daughters are going to have to say which one of them loves him the most. And he thinks that his younger daughter will win this contest easily, but his youngest daughter refuses to play. She refuses to flatter him. And so he flies off the handle and he ends up banishing one of his most trusted advisors, and banishing his daughter. And then the two daughters and their husbands, who he has divided the kingdom up against, begin infighting and begin stripping him of what remaining power he has, until eventually he has nothing at all. He has no family, he has no title. He's left out in a storm all on his own with just his fool, and he goes mad. And in madness, he sees that the way the society had been structured around him was, in fact, an insane way of structuring things, and he finds some kind of sanity through this madness. And I won't tell you everything else that happens, but it's one of the great stories ever told, and consequently, many versions of it have been spun out, and one of them is Succession, which you'll now see on HBO, which is really based on King Lear.
Oh, yes, I'm all caught up on that, waiting for the fourth and final season. But I'm glad that you mentioned Succession, because King Lear's, it's been adapted in so many different forms, most recently Succession, but I mean, you'll find echoes in what was that show? Empire, in
Yes.
Kurosawa's film Ran. That was totally King Lear. I mean, it sort of echoes down through the generations, and everyone sort of has their own King Lear. But talk about why do you think that is? Is it just sort of the family dynamic, or why do you think it is? Why do you think it's so malleable to each generation?
Well, I mean, partly it is what you're talking about. It is about generational conflict. uh, and which we see everywhere now in our culture, right? You have an older generation that have run things a certain way, and a younger generation saying, well, why do we do it that way? I don't think we should do it that way. Let's rewrite the rules. And the older people saying, well, we've kind of tried it the way that you're thinking about, and it hasn't worked. And the younger people saying, no, you haven't. And so that tug of war of generations is very much uh, going on in King Lear. The marvelous character of Edmund, the bastard son of Gloucester, who, because he is from an illegitimate union, because his mother wasn't married to his father, he is not. The rules of the society are he's not going to inherit any of his father's wealth. And Edmund's asking the really fundamental question, which is, why is that? Why is that? I'm just as strong as my brother. I'm just as smart as my brother. Why do I get nothing? And he allies himself with nature itself and says, I will use my natural gifts, my intelligence, my cunning, my physical capability, and my ruthlessness to take what has been unjustly kept from me. And of course, you can feel how modern that is, even as I explain it to you now. So this is really a play about what we deal with every single generation. But I think now more than ever, because of social media and because of young people being able to talk to themselves, or rather each other, in such an immediate way and organize themselves, I think these questions have been pushed even more to the forefront. So, yeah, it's the big questions. And finally, at the bottom of it, who are we? Who are we really when you take away the all the all the labels? When you take when he's no longer king, who is Lear? When he's no longer a father, who is Lear? When he no longer identifies even as the man Lear, when his brain begins to deteriorate and he doesn't have the memory of who he was yesterday, who is he? Right? These are the big questions that Shakespeare's wrestling with.
Oh, so many big questions involved in this. And I like that. I want to go a little more into what you mentioned a second ago about how um, it feels very present day. You said it's propulsive, it's moving forward, all that stuff, like attention wise, but pace wise, it's present day. But what about visually? Why, you said don't picture Stonehenge. What are we seeing as a visual work? Backdrops, costumes. Is it like contemporary clothing, or what are we seeing?
Yeah, you'll see very rich people mostly in the 21st century. So these are questions that Simon Godwin, our incredible director, wanted people to be asking themselves and to see that this is a play about us. So um, clothing, for example, context, the place where something is set, and clothing can tell you so much of the story. And so often when people go to Shakespeare, they feel a little bit lost. They don't understand. Well, if you're watching something and it's in Elizabethan clothes, or if it's in a kind of Stonehenge setting, the clothes don't tell you much about who the people are. But let us say in the first scene of King Lear here, and you see Gloucester, played by the marvelous Craig Wallace, and he's a four-star general who you might see standing next to the president in the Oval Office today. And we know immediately who he is. We know that he's a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So when he reacts in a certain way, we know who's reacting. When you see the daughters dressed, as Ivanka Trump might dress, or as Kim Kardashian might dress, or as any very famous, wealthy young woman might dream of being dressed. We know who they are. We know the privilege that they come from, and each piece of clothing tells you part of the story, brings you into it. Um, as similarly, each room that something's set in, when we see a beautiful living room that's been torn apart by Lear's 100 Nights. Well, we know, we understand that. We see that that was a beautiful high end couch that's been trashed. We when something one terrifying scene in King Lear is set in the wine cellar of one house, and that gives it this really a context which I won't give away to you right now, but which makes the scene all the more horrifying. Um, when they are uh, looking for shelter out in the storm, what kind of shelter do you find out where we're told there's scarcely a bush around this house out there, so there are no places to shelter, and what they find is the old wrecked fuselage of a plane, and so we know that this is a war-torn area where this plane has gone down, and so all of these visual references allow us to enter into the play more fully.
I love it. You painted a visual. I know we're a radio station, but you just totally painted a visual picture with your words. We could I could picture that as you were describing it. And also shout out Craig Wallace. You mentioned, love that guy. Love him so much. He's Ebenezer Scrooge every December here at Ford's Theater.
Yes, yes. And Gloucester is one of the great roles that Shakespeare wrote. In King Lear, there's an entire second plot, and that is the plot not just of Lear and his daughters, which I told you about, but of Gloucester and his sons. So Gloucester finds himself also in a generational conflict with his sons. I mentioned Edmund, his bastard son. He has another son, Edgar, and Craig, of course, is their father. So to have an actor of that stature, that weight and ability in that role not is necessary, and we're so fortunate to have Craig in that role.
Oh yeah, he's great. He's great. Well, I have more than enough to work with on King Lear. Before we run, I think my listeners would kill me if I don't at least ask you one thing about Hadestown. You played Hades in the original cast of Hadestown. We spoke with Anais Mitchell a few months ago about crafting it, but in terms of as a role for from a performance standpoint, what was so juicy about playing Hades? I mean that's an all timer.
Well, first of all, the piece is just absolutely beautiful, and I was involved with it from its first New York incarnation in 2016 through a number of productions. We did it then in Canada, we did it in London, and finally on Broadway. And so to be with it through that process and to build the piece, I think was a wonderful experience for me. The role of Hades is a wonderful role. I look for in characters. I look for the place where the character is broken. I look for the hurt place. And in Hades, it's in his relationship with his wife that he loves Persephone so dearly, and this chasm has begun to open up between them, and he'll really do anything to get her back. And then finally, the fact that Aeneas wrote a bass role, and very few composers write for bass singers. So that was a delight for me.
I love it. I love it. All right, cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I guess sort of final seconds. Where else can we see you coming up? I guess you're shooting season 2 of The Gilded Age and season 2 of Schmigadoon. You'll be in that too, right?
Yeah, The Gilded Age is now in post production, and it will air sometime later this year. We shot the whole second season, which I can't tell you too much about, except that it is great. And I think you'll love what's happening with my character Richard Clay this year. And then the second season of Schmigadoon, they go looking for the town of Schmigadoon. This is on Apple TV, Apple TV Plus. Gilded Age is on HBO. And the second season of Schmigadoon, my character is Octavius Kratt. The town they find this year is not Schmigadoon; it is the town of Schmicago. And Octavius Kratt is a very important man in the town of Chicago, and I think you will laugh your head off.
As in Bob Fosse's Chicago,
as
Are we
in,
doing?
yes, as in Barry, Fosse, Candor and Ebb, all the great musicals of the 60s and 70s.
I love it. I love that and all that jazz. Well, that's fantastic. So yeah, check out Patrick Page on Apple TV Plus's Schmigadoon, and of course, The Gilded Age on HBO. Season 2 will be coming out. Yeah, I guess that kind of brings us full circle because you mentioned another HBO show, Succession, which is a lot like King Lear, and now we're back fully around, sir. I guess in closing, pretend I'm not even here. Tell directly to our listeners and say, "Hey, DC, come on out to see our version of King Lear. You know, you won't regret it."
Hey, DC, come on out to see our version of King Lear. If you've been scared off by Shakespeare in the past, I promise you'll have the time of your life and you'll understand what all the fuss is about. King Lear plays through April 16th at the Shakespeare Theater Company.
Thank you so much, Patrick Page on WTOP. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. Our theme music is Scott Buckley's Clarion. Remember to give us a 5-star rating if you like what you hear. We'll see you next time. I wanted to take a second to tell you about an app I really enjoy. Living in the DC area is great, and Podcast DC gathers all of the local shows that I like all in one local app. Health, sports, local news, politics, and so much more. Podcast DC is the new local app with hundreds of DC area podcasts to choose from. I can earn exciting rewards just for listening and share the podcasts I love instantly. Available in the App Store or in Google Play, listen local with Podcast DC.